My story starts off in chaos, like my life had been thrown into some game I never asked to play. I was literally born on the streets. My mother was an addict to the core, lost in a world I could never understand. My father sat in prison because he was a criminal, the kind one is never proud to call family. So, immediately after birth, child services took me away from her and placed me in a shelter. For almost 14 years, it was my home, a place full of rules and people just as lost as I was. Everything started changing around my birthday 1 or 2 months before I turned 14. That was when my mother reappeared out of nowhere, like a ghost from the past that I wasn't even sure I wanted to see again. She took me to her home, a cramped place that smelled of cigarettes and despair, where her partner, my stepfather, right, was always around, giving off a weird vibe with looks that made me uncomfortable. But the strangest part wasn't him, it was my mother. She had these ideas that, honestly, I couldn't quite grasp. "You're going to help us, okay? Just do what I tell you." That's how the scheme started. I stayed with my stepfather because she wanted me to. It was to help, she said. But who was she helping? The rare times my mom would come to the shelter during the time I was there, she did so then. But whenever she did, it seemed like she was trying to make amends in some sort of twisted way. Years went by, and when I was about 11, she showed up again. This time, she was put together, at least, and appeared to want to prove that she was getting back on her feet. She sat with me on a cement bench in the courtyard and spoke with a smile mismatched with the heavy mood of our conversation. "Look, honey, I'm marrying, all right? He's a very nice gentleman, in his 60s, and he wants to help us. He's going to buy me a house, and that way we can get you out of here, because, as you know, the authorities are watching and they told me the only way they would take you with me is if I have a decent place to live." She was so perky that it almost sounded like she was really pleased. But even as a child, I knew something was strange about all of it. At age 11, my mom was clean, no addiction, no booze smell. She even seemed like another person. She'd found a way to prove to the authorities that she was capable of being responsible for me. But her sobriety alone wasn't enough to get me out of the shelter. She needed a home, which meant a permanent roof over her head and, better still, a husband. That's when she looked at me with that slightly anxious smile and said, "Honey, I'm going to marry him, okay? This man will help us. With that, he'll go to court and get you out of here. I promise." I held on to that hope because, after all, anybody who grows up in a shelter knows it's nothing like a fairy tale, not like Chiquititas or anything like that. It was a far harsher story, sleeping in the same room as a bunch of people, arguments constantly, tasteless food, and the weight of knowing no one really cared for you. So by the time she said she would take me to her house, I wanted to believe her. I really did, because anything seemed better than staying in that place. She appeared just before my 14th birthday at the shelter with that man. They were able to take me out of there. The day I left felt surreal. When I got to their house, my jaw dropped. It was cozy, completely different from anything I had known. For the first time in my life, I would have a room of my own with a bed, a wardrobe, and even a pretty curtain on the window. I had never had anything like that before. At that moment, it felt like everything was finally going to work out. And the best part was being with my mom. I missed her so much, even knowing that our relationship had been one of ups and downs. We seldom saw each other when I was in the shelter, but the longing had been real. Having her with me now felt like having a missing part of me back. During those first days, I just couldn't help but keep smiling. It was huge happiness, and I could not believe it would be my life now. But happiness did not last long. It took me very little time to learn the truth about that old man. He was not the nice guy my mom spoke about, but a monster, an ogre. He made my mother work like a slave, and it wasn't just about keeping the house in order. He would have her clean the floors many times a day until they were to his liking and would swear at her if he saw something a bit out of place. And it wasn't just that, he would abuse my mother, with words and with force. He would say that she was useless, stupid, would make her feel like trash. If she didn't do things as he pleased, he wouldn't let her even eat. My mother thin, tired, deep dark circles, living like a prisoner in that beautiful house it seemed when I first arrived. And the worst knew I couldn't do anything, just watch, with the blood boiling with rage and impotence for not knowing how to get us out of that hell. One day, I couldn't take it anymore. I called my mom aside and asked her, "Why do you put up with this? Living like this, being treated like trash?" She cast her head down, took a deep breath, and, in a low tone, nearly as if she was ashamed to tell me, "Either this, or I'd never be able to get you out of that shelter. I have no one here, honey." It was the only way. Then, I began to pay even closer attention. They fought almost every day. Actually, he did the arguing, yelling, and screaming, while Mom just stayed quiet, made no reaction, fear in her eyes. She became a ghost in that house, and I was able to see and feel how much terror she was living in with that old man. She did everything to avoid anything that might irritate him, but somehow, it always seemed like nothing was enough. He always found a reason to humiliate her, to step on her, every day. It hadn't even been a month since I had arrived in that house when everything exploded. It was during one of those terrible fights which make the walls shiver. I was in my room, but I could hear everything. Shouting everywhere, yet I managed to hear him say something that sent chills down my spine that given the burden my mom and I put on him, it should be just fair I became his woman, his wife. It was the first time I saw my mother hit back. She went after him, trying to hit and push, anything. But he was much stronger. He grabbed her and started hitting back with such violence that I thought he wouldn't stop. In the middle of the beating, he yelled, "Are you crazy? Want to go back to the streets, or are you trying to get me to throw you both out?" And that's when my mom stopped. She just cried quietly while he kept talking as if she was nothing. I was in my room, listening to everything, and clenching my fists in anger, but also in fear. I was attempting to reassure myself that this was merely a fight, he was just out of control, and he would never do anything to me. I am a minor, I thought, and if he tries something, I have the right to call the police. So I wanted to believe. One of those nights it was already late, and I had just fallen asleep when I woke up to my mom sitting beside my bed, crying a lot. I got scared and asked, "What is it, Mom? What happened?" She couldn't speak properly, just sobbed, until she managed to mutter something that chilled me. She asked me to lie down with him. She didn't exactly say those words, perhaps due to shame or maybe not wanting to admit what she was asking of me, but that was it. She was asking me to go to bed with that old man. "Why, Mom? Why?" I asked, already desperate, and she answered through tears, "Honey, do it. If you don't, he'll throw us both out on the street. We have no one here. I don't report him because either he throws us out, or he could destroy us both." That was it. This was out of fear of losing the little we had. She said, staring at me with this broken gaze, as if she had given up on fighting. I was out of breath, my head spinning, not knowing what to do, what to think. I started crying desperately. I was only a girl, still young, and this idea of lying with that disgusting old man, whom I already hated only because of what he did to my mom, was impossible to bear. He would be the first man in my life. Even at the thought, my heart seemed to burst. I shook my head, sobbing, "No, Mom, no, are you crazy? I can't do this." My mom took a deep breath, trying to stay calm through the tears. She squeezed my hand and, with a voice so serene that it freaked me out even more, said, "Honey, I know it's hard, but it will be quick. It won't take long. Close your eyes, think of a boy your age, a good-looking one. Just pretend, don't think about it, because in just a few minutes, it will all be over." She was saying it soothingly, but those words just made it worse. My world seemed to come apart right there, in that second, with that solution my own mother was asking from me. The old man was shouting, threatening, saying he would throw both of us out. I had no way out. I left my room, devastated, my legs shaking, and went to my mom's room where he was. I was walking, as it were, right into the jaws of some nightmare. When I entered, his smell, his presence, everything was nauseating, but what my mom had said was what I did. I lay on the bed. I said nothing. Motionless, like a statue, I shut my eyes with force so strong it hurt my head, trying to run to a place he was not, trying to think of anything else, but I couldn't. The feeling of that repulsive old man grunting so hard on top of me was an utterly disgusting feeling. It felt like it would never end, that time had stopped there and was torturing me. When he finally finished, all I could manage was to murmur, barely with a voice, "Can I go back to my room?" He just gestured with his hand, telling me to go. Before I left, he told me to call my mom back. And I did so, with a lump in my throat that seemed to choke me. In my room, I cleaned myself as best as I could, while crying. I couldn't even take a shower because I knew that he would complain or even hit me. I didn't sleep that night, I only cried. Then, after a while, my mom came back into my room. Her face was swollen from crying. She sat down beside me to try and calm me down. But I couldn't. First thing that I had said, "Mom, for God's sake, let's call the police, let's report him. We can't stay here." My heart was racing, filled with anger, fear, everything all at once. My mother shook her head in distress. "No, sweetie, we can't. He'll never let us leave here." Now, we didn't have a telephone, nor any neighbors nearby who could help. It was late at night, and the chances of leaving without being noticed were zero. "If we do anything, he'll find out, and then it will be worse," she said, glancing at the door as if she actually feared he was listening to her. I realized my mom was trapped like me, maybe even more so. It only seemed to make everything that much more hopeless. My mom went through it all only for the sake of having a house, for pulling me out of the shelter. For her, it had been good enough to make it through that hell. But after that first time, everything was destroyed in my life. He started beating on me, too, just like he did my mom. The difference now lay in the fact that it wasn't just her living like a prisoner, it was both of us. He made sure to make it clear that in that house, the two of us were his women. From then on, my world was a daily nightmare. Everything of him disgusted me, the smell of him, the way he talked, the commanding. And worse, he knew I could not escape. We were trapped, without anyone to rescue us. My mother and I lived under the same regime with the same humiliations, the same obligations. It wasn't a house, it was a cell, and he was the jailer. It happened a few more times, until, thank God, it finally ended. But until then, every day was a new torture, a wound that seemed as if it would never heal. One day, the counselor from the shelter came to our house. It was one of those routine visits they did, to check out how the adaptation was going, to see if the family was taking good care. It was something normal, actually, that the authorities did for some time after giving custody back to a mother. But that day, I felt something different. Maybe it was hope, maybe it was fear that Shed noticed the truth. When she arrived, the old man tried to act all nice, offering her coffee, making small talk, but it was all so forced that it made me nauseous. My mother barely looked at the counselor, just nodded yes or no with her head down, like she always did in his presence. I knew that could be an opportunity, but I didn't know either how or whether it was safe for me to say anything. I remained there, curled up, under the weight of his look, a silent warning for me to say nothing. During the conversation, the counselor seemed very attentive. She asked normal questions, but you could see in her eyes something was wrong. Suddenly, she asked to speak to me alone. The old man even tried to dodge it, but she was firm. When we were alone, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I broke down, started sobbing, and told her everything. "He hits me, he hits my mom, he threatens us all the time, says he'll throw us both out, and he does horrible things to me." She went pale, but tried to stay calm. She held my hand and said, "I'm going to call the police." I panicked. "No, please, if you do that, he'll destroy me and my mom. Please, don't do anything now." She took a deep breath, thought for a moment, and then spoke softly in a bid to soothe me. "Okay, I will not do anything now." We talked some more. She got me together, asking me to wash my face and take the signs of crying off my face so that nobody could suspect anything when we left the room, and she continued acting as if nothing happened, saying goodbye to the old man and my mom with that forced smile. But inside, I knew different. She was brewing something. She left silently without arguing or raising any suspicions, but the manner in which she looked at me before leaving gave me a bit of hope. Probably someone could help us. After the counselor left, he pounced on me, furious, glowing with anger. "What did you say to her, huh? Tell me now." He glared at me with that menacing stare that made me want to disappear, but shaking inside, I could lie, nothing. I just told her, "I'm glad I finally can be here with my mom, that it's nice to have a home, my own room." He continued staring at me, yet eventually believed it. He murmured something and left, his anger still high. It wasn't long before heavy knocks fell upon the door, and they were the police. My mother went to open it, but she was so scared. With a quivering voice, she tried to ward them off by saying that everything was okay, that they didn't need to come inside. But I just couldn't keep my silence. I ran to the door before she could close it and started talking, spilling everything that had been bottled up inside me. "He hits me, he hits my mom, he does horrible things to me." I said it all, like to the counselor, but without holding anything back. The police officers got serious and came into the house, and at that moment, I felt like maybe finally something would change. The police didn't give him any time to react. When he realized it was serious, he tried to resist, but there were 4 police officers, and he didn't stand a chance. They took him away immediately. I went to get exams confirming everything that had happened with me, and it came back positive, of course. My mother also underwent some checking, and it was verified that he did the same with her, even though she was his wife. That was monstrous. Everything I told them was confirmed. Besides that, in the house, the police found an illegal weapon. That didn't make the situation of his imprisonment any better, either. The process was fast. It didn't even seem to be the same system that usually takes such a long time. The sentencing came almost immediately, as if it was fate's decision that it was time he paid for everything. We kept living in the house, since on paper my mother had rights as his wife, but she was so scared, constantly looking over her shoulder, afraid he would get out of prison and come after us for revenge. The house that had once been hell now turned into a tense place, but at least we were free from him. My mother decided she wanted to sell the house so that we could go back to her hometown and start over, far away from everything. But it wasn't possible to sell. We needed his signature, and that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. Without money and with no other options, we were confined in that place alone, as if the shadow was still there, though he was in jail. The police persons and the counselors also tried to reassure us, saying he would not get out easily, but my mother was terrified, traumatized, with reason enough, anyway. We didn't leave the house, living locked in, placing furniture as barriers against the doors as if this would protect us. I stopped attending school. I took a long time not seeing anyone because my mom was afraid of everything. Even the night's silence was scaring. Anything made my heart beat fast, and I could see with my mother's eyes the same feeling. Even from afar, he kept us hostages. Not long after, news arrived. He was found dead in his cell. The official version was that he had committed suicide, but, knowing that old man as I didn't give it a second of credence. He was so wicked, the sort of man who lived on hate and resentment. I was sure he would have preferred to spend 10, 20 years locked up, just to get out and seek revenge, rather than do that. It didn't make sense to me. It must have been something else. Maybe the police, maybe the other inmates, because, with the way he was, there were plenty of people who had reasons to want him gone. But honestly, I didn't care. Knowing he was no longer in the world took a great weight off my shoulders. For the first time in a very long period, I could breathe without that constant fear. The most important thing was that, in the end, we were free. After all that, my mother managed to sell the house, and we went back to her hometown, to the state where she was born. It wasn't until I turned 15 that I actually met my real family, all of them, my grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. And that was when I started to understand my mom's story a little better. She had run away from here when she was a teenager with my dad, her boyfriend. Now, they moved to another state full of plans that quickly fell apart. That is where my dad got her into drugs, addicted. He was a thief, always involved in shady stuff until he ended up in prison. My mom was alone and pregnant with me, staying on the streets with no place to go. That's how I was born, practically on the streets, carrying a story already full of pain even before I understood the world. Today, at 37, all in all, my mom and I are okay. I was able to start my life, got married, kids, but no matter how hard I had been trying to move forward, there's still some things that hurt. There are memories that haunt me even when I try not to think about them. When the memories of those experiences, in that shelter, in that house with that old man, arise, it is impossible not to feel the pain. Impossible not to cry. I knew that man only for such a short time, but the time I spent with him was enough to leave deep scars on my soul, marks which I know I shall carry always, no matter how long time may pass. There are things in life that time doesn't erase, and as much as my life today is so different, the pain of all that I endured still follows me in a way that will never be fully muffled. Hello, my loves, ¿cómo están? Hopefully, bien. First of all, I want to apologize because this is such a heavy story, but at the same time, I want you to reflect on the lesson that can be taught from it. You know, sometimes we complain about such small things. If you have never experienced a trauma and your life is good, you have a job, good health, a house, and a family, sometimes you still find yourself with complaints about not having a new outfit to wear out or eating rice and beans day in and day out, right? Routine things that really don't feel like burdens, but are. After listening to a story like this, one can understand that, yes, there are people facing actual suffering pains that leave lifelong marks. It makes us understand these petty daily difficulties are just a part of life and have nothing to do with real suffering. Anyway, I know this story was heavy and difficult to hear, but if you could like, share, or comment, it would help me a lot. And if you want to send me your own story for me to read, reflect on, and maybe share here in our little space, I'll leave my Instagram tagged for you. That's where I'm receiving the stories, and I'd love to hear from you. A big kiss, stay with God, stay in peace, and see you next time. Bye, I'm out.